I think 2021 has actually been a year that will be remembered for very big mergers, acquisitions, where Korean studios have come in to acquire meaningful stakes in meaningful content companies. So what came from conversations being had with the WGA and CAA and WME about whether or not they could own a content company and also represent talent. When these companies divested their content arms, who was there waiting but the big studios in Korea. So I think the JTBC acquisition of WIP is an incredibly influential, impactful move for a Korean studio, and I think this is just the beginning. And in fact, I think it paved the way for the even larger deal where CJ acquired Endeavor Content. So what does this mean? This means a lot of things. It means Korean content makers, broadcasters, and streamers have their eyes on the globe, on the world, on their content being shown everywhere. It also means that they are looking at US and international content with an eye toward possibly adapting it internally. And I think if you look at a show that we made with JTBC called 18 Again, which was a adaptation of 17 Again, I think you look at that appetite for cross-pollinating. So I think you'll definitely find JTBC adapting WIP content in the near future. I think what's interesting is seeing how Korean studios are looking to take their content and bring it to America, but also look outside, look at content from America without any sort of endgame in Korea. These are now very global players like all of the other big studios, right? So Mayor of Easttown, which is a big hit in the US, can that be adapted in Korea? All of this amazing content, but I also think the other thing is both JTBC and CJE&M, of course, have ownership stakes in streamers. And I think what will be very interesting is, will that content from Endeavor Content, from WIP, end up being used as what will help launch these Korean-owned streamers? Webtoons are a very new concept. It's very unfamiliar, and I would say a lot of viewers aren't even aware most of the time that webtoons have inspired their favorite shows. But if you look at Naver's acquisition of Wattpad and sort of this move to consolidate all of the webtoons into a smaller group of companies, you see what a priority it is. I think Americans are starting to get used to webtoons, but I think they already have this in their DNA. Look at what we do with DC Comics, right? DC Comics have inspired numerous TV shows, movies, franchises. Look at obviously Marvel and what that means. What we love from traditional comics and superheroes to webtoons, I think is a small jump, and we're seeing it. We're seeing that acceptance of webtoons already, because the young audiences that are now driving viewership, they read, whether it's LATAM audiences, American, they're all reading and watching those webtoons. So I think there will be a time when there's a larger number of scripted series, even original US series that haven't even launched in Korea, coming out of webtoons, whether they're US webtoons, Korean webtoons. We will see a point where webtoons inspire original content in the US, not even in Korea. And I think those big acquisitions of Endeavor Content, of WIP from CAA by JTBC, you're just gonna see a much easier flow of content coming to the US. The accessibility to webtoons will now just be out there. You'll have colleagues from CJ talking to their colleagues now at Endeavor Content saying, have you seen this new webtoon? I think as countries and companies get closer together, that flow of information is going to be effortless. What I think is super exciting is, and it's what happens every day. Now, for the last 5 or so years, I've had daily calls with KBS, JTBC, CJE&M, NBC, SBS. As I speak to colleagues and now friends, I'm seeing more and more content. And I think that's going to happen now, where Korean studios are owning US studios. There's these close JVs, close collaborations. You're going to see the webtoons coming to America even before they're made in Korea, because there's now that effortless flow of communication. So in the same way that I have those scripted conversations with all of my friends and colleagues in Korea, this is happening more and more where I get pitched webtoons all the time. And there's many webtoons now that I'm looking at with Warner Television that haven't even been adapted in Korea, and we're looking at the IP. So IP is such an important thing, whether it's books, existing formats, movies from abroad. We're looking at webtoons just as importantly as international TV shows, books, blogs, podcasts. Webtoons are now a key area where we can find content. 2021 is going to be looked at as a year of mergers, acquisitions, where Korean studios took a very thoughtful look at content creators in America, found opportunity, and seized on that opportunity. And you see that in the most clear and salient way with JTBC acquiring WIP and CJ&M acquiring Endeavor Content. So what is the strategy? For me, the strategy, of course, is diversifying outside of just selling formats from Korea internationally, where you're not meaningfully involved in the production. You're just seeing your shows adapted in the way that KBS, of course, created The Good Doctor, but it's ABC who's really producing it, and there's third-party producers who are involved. It's more of a consolidation where Korean production companies and studios are going to have more of a hand in the production. Also, of course, the strategy of buying into US entities that own content as a way to then launch one's own streamer, I think is also a clever strategy. So when you look at JTBC or CJ that have their own streamers, if there is in fact a desire to launch those streamers globally, of course owning an Endeavor Content where there is that catalog will help with that beachhead, right? That's going to be the first soldiers coming out are going to be those incredible bits of IP, of US IP and international and Korean formats that are already in existence. So I think they're just bolstering their ability to launch an international platform. I think it's a very interesting strategy and I think we've only seen the beginning. I see 2022 being a year where Korean studios and networks start buying production companies around the US, and you're seeing it. You saw CJ bought Echo rights a couple of years back. I think they're going to be buying content makers in a very big way. I think they're going to be looking at unscripted as well as a real revenue generator, especially in the global marketplace. 2022 is absolutely going to be the year where Korean studios double down not only in the US, but in the UK, Australia, Germany, places where formats and series are launched and have big audiences. What I think is an interesting byproduct, Korean companies acquiring American and international companies, of course, that then allows the Korean company to have access to an amazing catalog, an amazing library. The other bit that we don't talk about is it also allows Korean studios to have access to American talent. So American writers, American actors who have relationships with these studios. This gives them more of an ability to create content that will resonate around the world. And I think that's something that obviously was considered when Korean studios spent a good amount of money to acquire these companies. They now have access to top writers, and these writers can work with Korean writers. They can share ideas, they can co-develop ideas together that are palatable not only to Korean audiences, but international audiences. So having that access now to Hollywood, to those writers, to the actors, to the showrunners, that's something we should not forget about, and I think it's going to be very important on both sides. I think Americans are going to learn a lot from their Korean counterparts about how to make a show like Squid Game or Hellbound. And I think vice versa, Koreans are going to have easier access to US talent. It's a win-win in my opinion.